Sometimes talent, events, matches are just destined for greatness. With the right promotional expertise, they can blossom into a moment that can truly stand the test of time. And sometimes, well, sometimes they just blow it. I'm Senior Siete for 7 Wrestling, along with my special guest tag team partner, Vee Infuso, and we're going to take a look at 7 times the WWE screwed up a sure thing. Now, before we get into this, we appreciate your support, so if you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and springboard dropkick that notification bell. Also, check the description below for links to Vee Infuso's awesome content. Alright, V, welcome to the 7 Dome, brother. Ready for this?
As ready as I'll never be.
Alright, then start us off.
Number 1. Masked Kane. Now, if you're a more modern wrestling fan, you're probably used to Kane being the big red goofball. But for a time being, he was the company's most protected big man. He had an eerie aura and mystique to him that no wrestler before him ever had. Well, maybe an aura that one specific wrestler before him had. That being his on-screen brother, The Undertaker. But as the years went on, that flame started to die down. That still didn't stop the character from continually progressing and evolving over the years, and getting over with audiences even when he was tasked with becoming the devil's favorite comedian. The Kane-a-Rooney, anybody? However, all of this praise seemed to stop when the big man took off his mask. Sure, the initial storyline seeing Kane embrace his more monstrous nature was fun, but it also saw him having to sell for Shane McMahon on several occasions. Which is understandable, the guy's got the best punches in the business. Really hope the comment section understands sarcasm. Shortly thereafter, Kane just became any other big guy, and the hype behind the character died down completely. It didn't help matters that Kane saw some of the worst creative of his career during this era. You know, as long as we're forgetting Katie Vick. And oh god, I wish I could forget Katie Vick. Whether he was playing Beauty and the Beast with Kelly Kelly, essaying Lita, or failing miserably at recreating his career-making feud with his brother The Undertaker, Kane was always doing something, and it was almost never good. No matter how many titles they put on him, and they did put a couple, the damage was done. Nobody really cared about Kane anymore. He was still a fixture on the shows, but he wasn't an important or integral role. He didn't factor into many major storylines, instead becoming a bit player. So it was a no-brainer to give the Big Red Machine back his signature mask. The company hoped to revive the demon and return him back to his roots. And after 8 years of teetering between bad bizarre booking and total mediocrity, Masked Kane made a comeback. To put over John Cena in the worst angle of that year, it was pretty clear that this Kane experiment wasn't working anymore, which is why the character returned to comedy and formed Team Hell No with Daniel Bryan, which ultimately wound up being the highlight of the later years of Kane's career. Still, it's hard not to think of what could have been had he been booked properly, and not made to look like the Predator. But I guess it's true what they say. You can't capture lightning in a bottle twice. Oh well, at least we still have Blue Kane. Or not.
Number 2. Undertaker vs. Sting. Speaking of Kane's big brother, if you crack open your dictionary and thumb over to the D section, next to the term duh, you'll find a picture of Sting and the Undertaker. Look at them. They are tailor-made for each other. Dark, brooding, big entrances. Hulk Hogan made both of them look really dumb. They even both love vultures. Vulture bros! So why didn't it ever happen? Well, I wouldn't have put it on this list if it wasn't possible. And in the brief window that Sting was a WWE wrestler, meaning from his debut at Survivor Series November of 2014 through the Buckle Bomb of Doom in September of 2015, The Undertaker was active. He faced Bray Wyatt at WrestleMania, he reignited his feud with Brock Lesnar, and then battled him at SummerSlam. So, while there were several times in which this bout was possible, the best move would have just been to do it at WrestleMania 31. Sting's loss to Triple H left a bad taste in everyone's mouth. Hunter could have just focused on getting bounced around by Ronda Rousey later in that evening, Bray Wyatt could have definitely done without getting beaten up by an aging Undertaker, so let Bray pick up a win over, one of the 40 guys in that Intercontinental title ladder match. Then Sting and The Undertaker can have their dream match, with The Undertaker getting the win and also getting his mojo back after his WrestleMania 30 loss, and Sting can look like a bona fide legend. But instead, we got a reheated WCW-WWE war being fought 14 years after WCW's demise. To hear Sting's side of the story, he desperately wanted the Undertaker match and never understood why it didn't happen. Well, in his 6 Feet Under podcast, The Undertaker admits that the match would have done huge box office. However, he claims that Vince McMahon didn't want it, which is insane, but we'll give him a pass because, Vince has had idiotic notions before. Then Taker goes on to say that the match wouldn't have lived up to expectations, which is suspect. With their spooky ooky gimmicks, they could have used a variety of smoke and mirror tricks to make it memorable. Heck, the friggin' NWO and DX were pulled out to make the Triple H match decent. Also, the long-awaited Taker and Cena match was less than 3 minutes long. Did that live up to expectations? If I were a betting man, and I totally am, I'd wager the very real concern was that the WCW legend Sting would get cheered against the WWE legend The Undertaker, and Vince just couldn't let that happen.
Number 3. Sha OHare. When I think of missed opportunities, I think of Sha OHare. There was a guy who had everything but a proper push. He could talk, he could work, he had a look. And when he was in WWE, he had a gimmick that had some legs. OHare was a big man who had the agility of a much smaller athlete. He could rough you up in the ring, but then he could also fly through the air with the greatest of ease, hitting his patented senton bomb. All things considered, he was pretty great. When he started working a devil's advocate gimmick, which saw the seemingly soon-to-be star talking to others in the locker room and nudging them to give in to their intrusive thoughts, it seemed like the company had a star that could shake things up in a pretty interesting way. A character who would be great to put into storylines, and a worker who could have good matches along the way. Kind of an ideal pairing. What was much less of an ideal pairing is what they did with Sha OHare after the fact, teaming him up with Roddy Piper. This kind of pushed the character into the background and made him Roddy's right-hand man, becoming more muscle than mind, instead of a happy marriage between the two. As Roddy Piper is one of the greatest talkers in the history of the sport, of course he usually got the mic time. This basically turned what could have been a main eventer into an accessory for a former main eventer. He went from being a threat to being a lamp. A big buff lamp with early 2000s tribal tattoos. I don't know. Not helping matters was the decision to dress him up as what I can only describe as a never-before-seen Zoolander villain. Nevertheless, I take great pleasure in knowing that in the last decade, the internet seemed to pick up on OHare's potential. As someone who watched him at the time and was really upset to see him go, I feel somewhat vindicated in knowing that so many other people share my opinion. Sean, you're still a legend in all of our hearts and minds. Rest in peace, buddy.
Number 4. The Demon Finn Balor. In professional wrestling, silly things become popular all the time. The Rikishi Too Cool Dancing Trio, Eugene's Musical Chairs, Mr. Sacco, and let's face it, the idea that Finn Balor can just flip a switch to become a more violent, more aggressive version of himself simply by applying some body paint like a friggin' member of Blue Man Group? Yeah, that's pretty silly, but damn it if it doesn't work. In the same way that a Hell in the Cell match should only be used when you want to end a feud, the Demon character should only be used as a last resort. Finn Balor should hate becoming the Demon. It should take something from him every time he summons this malicious force. It should stand as a symbol that he has done everything in his power to stop the oncoming threat, and this is the level he's willing to go to put that opponent down. And it should always work. The Demon should always win until it's built up to the point that beating the Demon truly means something. If done correctly, boy, every kid in America would be painting their faces like the Demon every Halloween. But seeing as it's on this list, I They clearly didn't do it correctly. Once Balor made it to the main roster, he immediately busted the paint out for his first ever pay-per-view match in a not really a grudge match against Seth Rollins, but he won. From there, he called on the Demon Infused with Bray Wyatt, Baron Corbin, Bobby Lashley, always winning. That is until the weird fish flop match against Roman Reigns, which he lost. But hey, that's Roman Reigns, and everybody needs to acknowledge our tribal chief. But most recently, the Demon made an appearance in a feud-ending match against Edge at WrestleMania in a Hell in a Cell, where Balor lost because, Edge was back to put over the younger talent. Now we're in a situation where Balor's awesome little party trick doesn't get the job done, so what's the point? Oh well. The kids can always dress up as weird inflatable Andre the Giant for Halloween.
Number 5. Mordecai. Okay, I'm going to throw everyone a curveball here, but I wanted to shake things up and give you a gimmick that I personally think should have worked in hindsight, that maybe not everyone listening to this video is going to agree with. Mordecai was a man that was tailor-made to feud with The Undertaker, but never did. He was a big man dressed in all white and referenced all things heavenly. He was a captivating character, he had a pretty memorable entrance, and he had a very impactful looking finisher. Yeah, that's pretty much just Bizarro Undertaker. It was pretty obvious to fans of the show why this guy was brought in and who it was he was going to be going after. So imagine our collective disappointment when that match never materialized. Not so much as a meeting between he and The Undertaker ever took place. There was no battle of the behemoths. Not so much as a handshake hello or a nod of acknowledgement, nothing. This is often attributed to Mordecai's alleged greenness. And look, I know that he wasn't exactly an in-ring general at the time, but are we really gonna act like he was as bad as some of The Undertaker's previous opponents? Giant Gonzalez, King Kong Bundy, The Underfaker, even Kane, who many feel is his greatest rivalry, the two of them had some stinkers together. If you take the actual segments out of that feud, and you just watch the matches, well, you're gonna want to go back to the segments. On paper, at the very least, Mordecai was the perfect opponent for the dead man. And in execution, well, I guess we'll never know.
Number 6, The Invasion. This one's too easy. Well, too bad. The greatest feud in the history of pro wrestling isn't Ric Flair versus Dusty Rhodes, or Tommy Dreamer versus Raven, or Steve Austin versus Vince McMahon. It's WWE versus WCW, and while we're often led to believe this started with the Monday Night Wars when Nitro went head-to-head with Raw in September of 1995, it had been raging on for quite some time before then. We're not talking about fan debates over who's better, Ric Flair, Hulk Hogan, or Stinger the Ultimate Warrior. I'm talking about both sides taking a ton of shady promotional swipes at each other over the years. WWE literally created the Survivor Series to knock Starrcade out of its Thanksgiving pay-per-view time slot. The very first Clash of the Champions was held on TBS to compete head-to-head with WrestleMania 4. So yeah, this feud had raged on for over a decade before Eric Bischoff set up a ring in the middle of Mall America and before he poached Lex Luger at his unique button-up shirt. Apparently this total package doesn't come with a collar. From there, we have WCW announcers giving away taped Raw results on the air, Vince McMahon taking some really low blows with the Billionaire Ted skits, Eric Bischoff literally challenging Vince McMahon to a shoot fight on pay-per-view. If you didn't live through this, and it makes me feel really old to say that WCW died over 23 years ago, know that it was a very wild time. Flipping back and forth between TNT and USA for an entire evening, hoping you don't miss whatever wackadoodle thing they're going to throw at the wall next. Never mind the fact that for 83 consecutive weeks, a wrestling promotion was pinning Vince McMahon's shoulders to the mat. And no matter if you loved WCW or hated it, it was legitimately sad when they faded to black on the final episode of Nitro. Now, most of you know the story from here, but again, 23 years, so here's a quick recap. Vince McMahon purchased WCW's video library, trademarks, and the contracts of several lower card talents. Big names like Scott Hall, Kevin Nash, Sting, and Goldberg are happy to stay at home and collect their paychecks, while people like DDP work with AOL Time Warner to make the jump immediately. WWE makes plans to turn WCW into a separate brand with its own show and touring schedule, but this plan falls through, and gradually, WCW is introduced onto WWE programming as an invading force. A WCW takeover of the main event of Raw failed spectacularly. Although, come on, Buff Bagwell? What were you expecting? The recently deceased ECW is added to the mix as a way to bulk up the star power of WCW. Most people loved this idea, till about an hour later when Stephanie McMahon was named the owner of ECW. The initial Invasion pay-per-view does an insane buy rate, proving that there is definitely an audience and an appetite for this. They even call the main event the inaugural Brawl because they think this feud is going to have legs, or we're going to do it all again next year. But then, it got all McMahoned up. Several WWE names were added to the WCW-ECW roster, thus muddying the waters even further. Kurt Angle just up and wins the WCW title in a random episode of Raw. Every belt changes about 40 times. It's a mess. WCW and ECW are both made to look like jokes. Finally, the WWE drives the final nail in the coffin in a 10-man match where, of the 5 ECW-WCW representatives, only one is actually from ECW, and only one is from WCW. Wah, wah. A lot has been said and written about the WCW-ECW invasion. WCW just didn't have their big names. Vince would never let another organization look better than WWE. The WWE locker room hated the idea of WCW coming in and taking their spots. And while all of these are valid, they're also very overcomable. Overcomable? That's not a word. First of all, Ric Flair started with WWE the day after Survivor Series. The 3 main building blocks of the NWO joined the company 3 months later. Goldberg was in a year after that. Sting was free to work for TNA shortly after that. If this angle stays strong, adding those guys to the mix would only strengthen the WCW side. Second, yeah, for some reason Vince has always been wonky about an outside competitor looking strong against WWE talent, even when the talent's under contract to him. The aforementioned Sting is a perfect example of that, although the Road Warriors tell a very different story. They were very dominant when they came into the WWE, which is crazy because Vince has had no problem being Steve Austin's punching bag and his peeing bag for the majority of their feud. And as for the WWE locker room having an issue, well, that's business, isn't it? Sorry, Bradshaw. So yeah, some mix of those 3 issues killed the Golden Goose dead, which is a crime. Although, with how badly WWE has done with their brand split, with talent constantly hopping back and forth, it's possible they never would have been able to figure this thing out.
Number 7. The NWO. You can't talk about the WWF doing wrong by WCW without mentioning the massive disservice that they did to the NWO. The group was the hottest stable in the business at the time of the faction forming, adding raw and realness to a product that was otherwise lacking. In a lot of ways, this was a group of pioneers. Sure, it grew to massive proportions and it was filled with members who could at best be considered filler, but there was a time when the NWO was great. Unfortunately, that time wasn't in 2002, or 2000, or 2010, or 1998. You know what, let's just focus on 2002. The NWO debuted in WWF with a team consisting only of the original trio, which, in hindsight, was a smart decision. The group definitely was watered down by numbers, and it certainly favored quantity over quality. So bringing in the Trinity felt like the company was going to make a more condensed and elite version of that team. And because of this mentality, maybe they would do right where WCW did wrong. Well, as history dictates, that's not the case. The group was brought in almost begrudgingly, as Vince McMahon behind the scenes wasn't really fond of bringing in outside ideas. Except they were brought in as his stooges, with Vince taking credit for the team. Nonetheless, they had some pretty memorable moments at first, striking up feuds with The Rock and Stone Cold Steve Austin, who were inarguably the faces of the company during the Monday Night Wars. In some ways, it felt like this NWO did what the Invasion didn't, until they did exactly what the Invasion did, by having the WCW stars look like goofs when they were brought up against the company's flagship. Shortly into this short-lived run, Hogan left the team to turn face and have another Hulkamania tour. And this is where things began to fall apart at a very rapid rate. Looking to replace Hogan, they brought in the Cavalry. First X-Pac rejoined the team, then Big Show rejoined the team, then they added in Booker T. Because, I don't know, I guess he had a brother in the NWO, so why not? Then Goldust tried to get into the team. So now the numbers are going up again, but the interest in what they were doing was going down. The company's last-ditch effort at reviving the NWO was to turn them into DX, bringing Shawn Michaels into the fold, and almost adding Triple H as well. Add on to that Scott Hall was asked to leave relatively early on as well, and you have a team that no longer resembles what it is, logo aside. It's a really sad state of affairs when you think of all the success that they saw in that first company and how little they saw in this one. I won't say that the NWO in WWE is the worst incarnation of this team. I kind of think that TNA has the trademark on that one, and the WCW B team is surely a shoo-in for second, but this is leaps and leagues away from the stable at its best.
Well, there's our list. If you can think of any other times that WWE completely screwed up a sure thing, please let us know in the comments section below. Also, a huge thank you to my tag team partner, Vee Infuso, for helping us out. Check out his awesome channel using the links below. Any final words before you put this thing to bed, V?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. This has become one of my favorite wrestling channels in a very short period of time, and I know that it's only a matter of time before it becomes everyone else's, and completely eclipses mine.
Oh, stop it. Tag team champs forever, brother. Alright, if you enjoyed this, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, backhand chop that notification bell. Until next time, I'm Senior Siete for 7 Wrestling saying, bye-bye.